It shouldn't be entirely surprising to hear that people have changed over the years. If the world has changed around us and we live in the world, so therefore, yes, of course, people have changed. And the way that our identity has been formed over the years as people that are in the world should probably also change. We should expect that. And Marshall McLuhan, in his view of the global village, had already kind of foreseen that in not too keen terms at the time, with the arrival of electric technology, man extended or set outside himself a live model of the central nervous system itself. To the degree that this is so, it is a development that suggests a desperate and suicidal auto-amputation. This is the pretty harsh words of a person seeing that the world is changing around himself and kind of having no control over it, that there are new media popping here and there, and they are moving quite fast, actually, much faster than anything that he had experienced in his lifetime. And you might think of this in like a rubber band, perhaps, or some other thing that can be changed in shape that you could stretch it, and in this case, there extend it, and perhaps extend it far outside of yourself. This is kind of connecting us to the conversation about techno shamanism, that people would eventually become a completely different item once they have completely adopted the electric media. And as it is regarded here, it would be kind of giving up a part of yourself, your old self, the one that is left in the past as well. This is probably something that happens either way. People have changed over the years. This much should be obvious, but how much more is those new media changing us than anything that we could have perceived? The same happened for the media itself, of course, and very early on, it was also observed that the pace at which our technology was improving was going at a rate that was unprecedented. This is something that is known as Moore's Law in the context of computer research, when people started to realize that quickly and exponentially the price of the items, the price of the items, the technology of the items, the research that goes into it has made it so that our technology was improving at a very fast rate based on the new development and based on the new technology and on how those technologies build on top of one another. It was kind of foreseen that very quickly our technology would far outpace our current knowledge. And so this is from Moore in 1965, looking at the number of components into electric circuits, which was observed to be already doubling pretty much every year from the 1950s to the 1960s. They said that integrated circuits would lead to such wonders as home computers, or at least terminals connected to a central computer, automatic controls for automobiles, and personal portable communications equipment. The electronic wastrage needs only a display to be visible today. That was the word in 1965. And of course, today, all of these are pretty much our daily existence. We have home computers, we have pocket computers, in fact. We have those terminals connected to a central computer that exists pretty much readily and we take for granted. And so the same principle was observed for other things, for the fiber optic capacity, for example, for the network capacity as a whole, for the number of pixels in monitors. And all of these were very early on observed to expand very quickly. And of course, for us, this means that all of these technologies are now part of our daily existence and not so much a question anymore, not so much a item that is worth studying, I guess. And eventually, we have the much larger conversation of what that has done to our bodies. That's a question we'll examine a little bit more later, next week, I guess. But in the context of this class, the person that has already mentioned this and that we have already mentioned in this class is Sherry Turkle. She was talking about how people are having a difficult time adapting to living their family life with technology in their hands. And she mentions that in the context of their communities, people would also have to review their existence based on these new technologies mediated by communities. She says when we step through the screen into virtual communities, we reconstruct our identities on the other side of the looking glass. This reconstruction is our cultural work in progress. At the same time that we are learning to see ourselves as plugged in technobodies, we are redescribing our politics and economic life in a language that is resonant with a particular form of machine intelligence. This is the context of this week, of course. In government, business, and industry, there is much talk of distributed, parallel, and emergent organization whose architecture mirrors that of computer systems. This utopian discourse about decentralization has come into vogue at the same time that society has largely become increasingly fragmented. Many of the institutions that used to bring people together, a main street or union hall, a town meeting, no longer work as before. Many people spend most of their days alone at the screen of a television or a computer. So again, so direct echo to her speech from a few weeks ago, but more importantly here, her aspect of seeing people as techno bodies, and especially as the fact that our architecture or our infrastructure, if you will, is reorganized the same way that we are organizing computers, that you have these networks that are much more based on the roads in between the places to go from this place to that place, that essentially people will be a lot more mindful of making the effort to reach the things that they want rather than having a pre-existing infrastructure that allows them to reach the things that they want and perhaps to reach the customers. This is another conversation that we had in context of economics of producers meeting consumers. Here, if we are redefining ourselves as technobodies, we are essentially the center of the universe, if you will, the center of the things that we are interested in, and no longer having to go to a city center or a mall or whatever it is that she mentions here. We become the place where the things are going. And that is certainly a pretty big change in terms of our culture, as she mentions, because we are thinking this way, we are organizing this way, we are making our lives as technobodies in a way that we could not have even thought of in the past. And thinking here, our imagination, our space in our brain, and how it is organized is very much informed by this discourse that goes around the technology, that people are thinking about these things and more or less thinking about adapting to it. Now, there remains an aspect of a personal choice here. If people have the possibility to adapt to new technologies or perhaps the opportunity to adapt to new technologies, they also have the opportunity to deny it, to refuse it, to do their lives in a different way. But that would also mean that there remains some alternatives from people. And this has become a new concern in the past few years because of the pandemic, especially, and the larger aspect of people being decentralized for all kinds of aspects of their lives, which now includes work and school and even the delivery of food. Those things would revolve around the person in a way that is completely new and that is very much seen as a problem by a certain segment of society. Now, what that means, if you do not believe that these things are happening organically, is that there is a conspiracy to prevent people from being the way they used to be. But of course, that is not the case. This is not something that has been imposed from the top down. This is something that people have been doing, have been working on for quite a while now. This diagram here from the World Economic Forum, one of those boogeymen of the COVID-19 pandemic, shows how those different parts of the world are interconnecting with one another. And at the center of that remains the digital identity, the person who has an identifiable endpoint for all of these things, whether they are the news media, whether they are the entertainment, whether it is e-commerce. Those things revolve around us interacting with them. And of course, that is a very technological way to see ourselves as the key to unlocking the commerce, to unlocking the entertainment. And of course, the business models themselves are organized around these same systems of catering specifically to this person of that person. However, as we mentioned yesterday, in a context of algorithms, that also means that you would either, on the one hand, require all of the available data about yourself to be available to a computer, and that is not necessarily a good idea or even a feasible process, or kind of finding the median point here. The way that algorithms are designed is that those companies are trying to find out ways, kind of using guesswork to a certain extent, to find the things that would be interesting to you. In that case, of course, providing feedback becomes the most important part to training these algorithms. And you can see that in pretty much every part of your daily life these days, providing feedback. Providing feedback, for example, if you work in a retail store, you're being asked to hand out surveys about your service that day. Any feedback about the classes you are taking at UVM to let some administrator know that you enjoy the class or did not enjoy the class? Did it serve your education in some way or another? So, of course, we are more and more part of this machine, whether or not we like it, whether or not we want it, because it is working for some people, and for some other peoples, they kind of have to work with it. Now, for the context of our livelihoods, this also means mixing all of those different parts of our lives into the center, which is us in that context, or our techno body, if you want to separate that from your usual self. This is from Ito, who was the author, one of the authors of the Hanging Out book, who mentions especially the world of electronic gaming, which has become one of the forefronts of the digital revolution for the ways in which it has integrated all kinds of aspects these days. When you play a video game, you are also doing commerce. You are buying and selling stuff within the game, and the company that is selling you the video game is selling you and buying stuff around that as well. And of course, the video game includes an aspect of storytelling, an aspect of the visual, a soundtrack, and all those things are kind of, contributing to your emotional states and perhaps manipulating it if you want to see it that way, or perhaps kind of generating certain emotional states. But it is a very handy way to put each and every part of a story at your disposal in a box, on a CD, on the screen, or whatever it is. So Ito mentions that electronic gaming in Japan needs to be understood as one component of a broader media ecology that includes anime, manga, trading card games, toys, and character merchandise. I borrow the native industry term media mix to describe this linked character-based media. Although each media platform has particular emphases, Japan has a more integrated and synergistic relationship between different media types that you tend to see in the case of US children's culture. Popular series will make their way to all of the different platforms of a media mix, and each plays off the strengths of the other. Weekly or monthly manga magazines provide the serialized narrative foundation for the series, as well as the venue for disseminating information about new game and toy releases, strategy, and tournaments. TV series provide a focus for younger children, a broader audience, and a marketing channel. So these interactions between different forms of media, more or less consolidated between the same owners, creates a very all-encompassing system where you can have a very wide level of interaction with the media itself. Gaming packages that same content into an interactive form, building on existing recognition of character and backstory established through the narrative media. The synergies between the different media types have grown from the post-war period to the present, beginning with the manga in the 60s and the 70s, then incorporating the anime and toy industries. While electronic gaming was in a somewhat separate domain throughout the 80s, by the 90s it was well integrated with the overall media mix of manga and anime characters, aided by the popularity of game origin characters such as Mario and Pikachu. The close ties between manga animation, and gaming are one distinctive element of the Japanese media mix. And in the context of everything we have mentioned before, you could see the same media mix now appearing, for example, on your cell phone, which is both a way to listen to music and to watch movies or to watch sports or to interact with your friends. All of those things are centralized into one space. And you could make that the same argument about other media empires, your Facebooks and your Twitters that are constantly looking for new ways to interact with people, including the newest doohickey of the metaverse, which is integrated through Facebook, whatever that means in the grand scheme of things. And so our larger digital economy is reorganized around the specific receptivity of specific methods of communication. And of course, in that context, the gaming generation will be more receptive to games than those things that are not games, or the previous generations that are not growing up with games. This has led to what some people call the gamification of everything, really, from the video games that you are playing, of course, to those surveys that are kind of like games, which allow you to earn a certain amount of gift cards if you are lucky to be drawn. So there is an incentive for you to give feedback for a thing that eventually is supposed to benefit you as well. As Ito mentions in a different book, the current growth of network publics is grounded in the spread of digital technologies and networks, lowered cost of processing power and digital storage, accessibility of various digital production tools, as well as more pervasive network infrastructures, particularly through the mobile and wireless technologies, are all important factors. Yochai Benkler characterizes this as one of the central shifts toward a networked information economy. The move to a communications environment built on cheap processors with high computation capabilities, interconnected in the pervasive network. And this is a logical conclusion to these ever multiplying, ever quicker machines and networks and screens that have been produced over those years, which have now become pretty much ubiquitous and which allow for the distribution of cultural means, of political means, of economic interactions, of your knowledge as a whole. And obviously, that means that even though our bodies may not be quite the techno bodies that Turkle mentions, we are still a integrated component with those machines. We are the machines that allow the machines to run, and that makes us, quite obviously, as far as identity is concerned, a completely different animal than any one of the animals that came before us.